I'm Christopher, and this is Animal Attacks. In today's episode, we have 7 cases where confidence did more damage than the animals themselves. From a Karen who walked out into the dark toward a wild leopard, to a Karen who pushed past her guide and came face to face with a grizzly. We open in southern Africa, where a woman on a bush camp safari spent 4 days watching a wild leopard from a safe distance and decided that was enough to go meet him herself. It was March 14th, 2016. The bush camp sat at the edge of a private game reserve in southern Africa, a loose collection of open-air structures built low into the scrubland with no fences and no walls between the guests and the bush. Rennell Couch was 44 years old. She was an office manager from Phoenix, Arizona, and she had been saving for this trip for almost 2 years. It was a 7-day, fully guided small group safari, the kind of program where you are out in the open with the animals and nothing separating you from them. It sounds incredible, and for most people, it is. Rennell's issue was pretty simple. She thought she knew better than everyone around her, always. By day 2, she'd already complained about the meal schedule before the first full day was even over. She told staff the wake-up times were unreasonable. She got into a direct argument with one of the junior guides about the after-dark perimeter rule, framing it as a matter of common sense rather than safety, like the rule was an insult to her intelligence rather than a condition she had agreed to in writing. A leopard had been using the area around camp as part of his range for about 3 years. Wild, adult male, completely unmanaged. He moved through the perimeter at night and treated the camp like just another part of his territory. He had grown used to humans through exposure alone, not because anyone had worked with him or tamed him. That is a very different thing from safe. Staff were clear about that distinction. So was the paperwork every guest signed before arrival. On the afternoon of March 14th, the male was spotted resting near a storage structure on the eastern side of camp. 2 staff members went out to assess. Totally routine. They kept their distance, around 50 feet out, and observed him from a position downwind. He raised his head, looked in their direction, and settled back down. They watched him for a few minutes and returned to the main area. Rennell watched the whole thing from the common area, and that was enough for her. At dinner, she was telling other guests the staff were being overdramatic, that the leopard was clearly chill around people, that she'd watched the staff get close and nothing happened. One of the other guests pushed back. She brushed it off, said she trusted her own eyes. Every night, without fail, guests were reminded to stay inside the main lodge after 8 p.m. The perimeter path was off limits after dark. Every guest signed off on this before they even booked. At 9:20 p.m., Rennell left her room. She had clocked the Eastern Staff access gate earlier that day. Simple latch, not locked. With everyone else inside, she walked straight to it, lifted the bar, and stepped out into the dark with her camera and a keychain flashlight. Camp lighting carried maybe 15 feet past the perimeter. After that, it was just bush. The leopard had moved from the storage structure into low scrub about 30 feet northeast of the gate, sometime after dark. Rennell made it roughly 18 feet before he was on her. He came from behind, out of the scrub, covering the distance in under 2 seconds. The bite landed on the back of her neck and drove her straight down into the dirt. She never made a sound. Nobody knew she was missing until 10:45 p.m. when a routine interior check came up empty. Staff swept the perimeter and found the eastern gate unlatched and slightly open. They found her at 10:58 p.m., 18 feet out. The leopard was gone. Her keychain flashlight was still on in the dirt a few feet from her body. A response team reached the camp around 1:15 a.m. There was nothing to be done by then. Whatever she thought she was going to see out there, it was not worth this. Nobody wins an argument with a leopard in the dark. The post-mortem found a single bite to the back of the neck. It severed her spinal cord, and she would have been unconscious within seconds. It was over in under 3 minutes. The gate showed no signs of being forced. She opened it herself. The leopard was monitored in the weeks after, but never destroyed. The case was ruled accidental death. A wild animal responding to a stranger entering his space after dark. No staff member was found at fault. The thing about Rennell's story is that at least the leopard was wild and free-roaming. What killed Glorine Taft was locked in a concrete enclosure with a feeding slot in the wall, and she still found a way to put her arm through it. It was August 3rd, 2015. The reptile facility was a small, privately run attraction on the outskirts of a rural town in northern Queensland, Australia. It had been operating for several years, drawing tourists passing through the region who wanted a close look at some of the largest reptile species in the world. Glorine Taft was 51 years old. She was a retired school administrator from Tucson, Arizona, and she had driven nearly 3 hours with her adult daughter to visit the facility as part of a self-planned road trip. Glorine was the kind of person who had spent decades running buildings full of people and never really switched that off. She questioned the no-flash photography rule within the first 20 minutes of arriving. She complained to a second staff member about the feeding schedule not being convenient enough for visiting guests, and said she thought the rule was unnecessary. She was 20 minutes in and already running the place in her head. The enclosure at the end of the corridor held a single adult male saltwater crocodile, estimated at around 14 feet in length and close to 1,000 pounds. Saltwater crocodiles are the largest living reptile species on Earth and are responsible for more fatal attacks on humans than any other crocodilian. They are ambush predators with a bite force that exceeds 3,700 pounds per square inch, the strongest of any living animal. At close range, the strike is essentially instantaneous. The feeding slot built into the lower section of the enclosure wall was a narrow opening used exclusively by trained staff. It was designed to pass food through and nothing else. The scheduled feeding had taken place at 11 UAM. Saltwater crocodiles remain highly alert near the feeding wall for a significant period after a feeding session. A sign posted directly above the slot stated this clearly. Glorine had watched the feeding from the viewing rail. When it was over, she went up to a staff member and asked if she could feed the animal herself. She was told the session was done and that guests did not take part in the feedings. She rephrased the request, made it sound like a small thing, and asked again. The answer was the same. The staff member walked away. At 11:34 a.m., Glorine walked back to the enclosure on her own. Can you imagine being that convinced you knew better than everyone working there? The slot in the enclosure wall was covered by a hinged metal plate that closed with a simple hand-turn latch. It was built for staff to use quickly during feeding sessions, and nobody had ever thought to make it harder to open because walking back there alone was not something anyone expected a visitor to do. Glorine reached into her bag, took out a piece of food she had picked up from the facility cafe earlier, and pushed her right arm through the opening up to about mid-forearm. The crocodile had not moved far from the wall since the morning feeding. He struck before her arm had fully cleared the opening. The bite closed around her forearm, and the momentum of the strike drove her body forward into the concrete wall with enough force to dislocate her right shoulder on impact. The slot geometry prevented the animal from executing a full lateral roll, but the grip held completely. He did not release. Her daughter was standing about 15 feet back when it happened. Staff responded quickly, but the facility ran a single handler shift on weekday mornings, and the intervention kit was stored in the rear handling area rather than staged at the enclosure. Retrieving it took around 4 minutes. The crocodile let go when staff got in through the upper enclosure access. By that point, Glorine had already lost consciousness against the wall. Emergency services were called immediately, but given the rural location, they took around 22 minutes to arrive. Glorine Taft was pronounced dead at the scene. The post-mortem found the bite had crushed most of the bone in her right forearm and severed the major blood vessels. She bled out before help could reach her. Security footage confirmed she opened the cover herself. The case was ruled accidental death. No staff member was found at fault. The hand-turn fastener was replaced with a keyed lock. Glorine Taft thought 30 seconds with a crocodile was worth opening that slot cover for. Meanwhile, in Central Florida, a woman had spent the better part of a week at a big cat sanctuary, calling one of the tigers her favorite, and had fully talked herself into believing the feeling was mutual. It was June 9th, 2014. The sanctuary sat on a wide stretch of semi-rural land in Central Florida, a privately operated big cat facility that housed several rescued tigers under a paid volunteer program. Guests could book week-long stays, assist with basic enclosure maintenance, and observe feeding sessions under direct staff supervision. Roxanne Pitts was 38 years old. She was a real estate agent from Scottsdale, Arizona. She showed up on day one with the energy of someone who had already decided how the whole thing was going to go. By day 3, she was using the tigers' names in every conversation and had started referring to one of the adult females as her favorite out loud to the handlers, as though that meant something to the animal. By day 5, she had convinced herself that the tiger's calm behavior around staff was proof of a personal connection she shared with it. The handlers had seen this kind of thing before in volunteers. What they could not have predicted was how far she was willing to take it. The tiger was an adult female Bengal, 9 years old and around 280 pounds, surrendered by a private owner 6 years earlier. She was stable in familiar conditions, but she was still a wild predator, and feeding time wound her up every single time. During feeding sessions, one handler worked inside the secondary safety corridor, passing food through an interior slot while the enclosure stayed secured. Nobody else entered that corridor during an active session. That was the rule. Bengal tigers can weigh up to 350 pounds for females and significantly more for males. They can close 20 feet in under 2 seconds and generate over 1,000 pounds of bite force. Their killing bite goes to the back of the neck or the throat. The scheduled feeding for the adult female was set for 8 a.m. on June 9th. Roxanne had watched every prior session from the observation rail, always at the front, always watching the handler more than the animal. That morning, she was quieter than usual. As the handler moved toward the secondary safety corridor with the food container, Roxanne stepped out of the observation group and followed him. He told her to go back to the rail. She kept walking. She said she had watched the process enough times to know what she was doing and just wanted to be closer for her last session. She pushed through the corridor gate before he could physically block her without putting both of them in a bad position. The tiger had been pacing since 7:45 a.m. When the corridor gate opened and an unfamiliar figure walked in, she stopped and locked onto the corridor. She hit the interior chain link partition hard. The lower section of the partition bowed outward at the base, where the anchor fitting had worn down over time, opening a gap of roughly 14 inches at ground level. The impact threw Roxanne back into the outer corridor wall. She steadied herself, and instead of moving toward the gate, she took a step forward. The tiger's right forepaw came through the gap, and the claws caught Roxanne's lower left leg, pulling her forward and down to the floor. The handler was at the outer gate, working to get it open. The tiger's grip shifted from her leg to her left shoulder and upper arm and began pulling her into the partition. The gap was not wide enough to pull her through completely, but the force being applied at the contact points was severe. The emergency alarm went off. A second handler reached the corridor in under 2 minutes, deployed a deterrent through the exterior enclosure access, and the tiger moved to the far end of the enclosure. Roxanne was pulled out. Emergency services arrived about 18 minutes later. It was not enough time. The lacerations across her left leg, shoulder, and upper arm had already done too much damage. Her left shoulder had multiple fractures from being repeatedly forced into the chain link. The head injury from the initial impact against the corridor wall was flagged as a contributing factor, likely the reason she stayed on the floor instead of getting herself back to the gate. Corridor camera footage captured the full sequence. The gate latch was found open, consistent with being pushed through before it was secured. The case was ruled accidental death. The facility's protocols were reviewed and found to be sound. The only thing that had failed that morning was Roxanne's judgment. Roxanne's problem was that she felt too much toward the animal. Out in Zimbabwe, a woman on a walking safari had the opposite problem. She felt nothing toward a bull elephant in Must except irritation that it was blocking her path. It was October 22, 2017. The walking safari route cut through a wide stretch of mixed woodland and grassland on a private reserve in southern Zimbabwe. The terrain was mostly flat, with dry riverbeds breaking it up every mile or so and patches of dense thicket pushing in from the sides. Vonnie Sears was 47 years old. She was a marketing director from Denver, Colorado, who had organized the entire 2-week trip herself and showed up to the pre-walk briefing with a printed shot list of specific animals and angles she wanted. She had done one prior safari 3 years earlier and mentioned it enough times during the briefing that the other guests had tuned her out. The lead guide ran through the safety protocols the same way he always did. Vonnie took in the parts she agreed with and dismissed the rest as overcaution. African bush elephants are the largest land animals on Earth. Adult bulls can weigh up to 13,000 pounds and charge at 25 miles per hour. A bull in Must is a different level of dangerous entirely. Must is a hormonal state that floods the animal with testosterone and makes it aggressive, unpredictable, and extremely easy to provoke. The visible sign is a dark, oily fluid running down the side of the face. Every guide in elephant country knows what that means. The group picked up the bull at around 9:40 a.m., about 2 miles into the walk. He was standing at the edge of a dry riverbed, partially in shade, angled away from the group. The lead guide stopped everyone and assessed from about 80 yards out. The dark staining on the bull's left cheek was visible from that distance. He signaled the group to hold and began moving them laterally to route around the animal with the wind in their favor. Vani stepped out of the line and went forward. She had been shooting the elephant since the group stopped, and when the guide redirected everyone sideways, she decided that was not the angle she wanted. She closed the distance to around 55 yards. The rear guide moved to cut her off. She waved him away without making eye contact and kept going, dropping into a crouch to adjust her frame. The bull turned and came. The lead guide fired into the air and shouted. The bull did not slow. Vani got to her feet and took 2 steps back before the animal covered the remaining distance and hit her. The bull's lowered head hit her at full speed, sent her mass, and drove her straight down into the dry riverbed. He followed with a tusk thrust into her left side before the lead guide's second shot caused him to veer off. First contact to the bull, clearing the area, was about 11 seconds. The rear guide reached her within 30 seconds. She was already unresponsive. A radio call went to base camp immediately, but the logistics worked against them. Getting her to the nearest vehicle access point required a 20-minute carry on foot, and the response team was another 45 minutes out from there. It was 68 minutes before anyone with medical training got to her. The autopsy showed multiple fatal injuries. Both sides of her chest had broken ribs from the impact with the ground. The tusk had entered her left side, collapsing the lung. Her spleen had ruptured. Any one of those injuries required immediate surgery. She was over an hour from anyone who could provide it. Her camera was recovered about 12 feet from where she fell. The last image on the memory card was a shot of the bull already mid-charge, taken at under 30 yards. She never stopped shooting. The lead guide's actions were reviewed and found to be sound at every point. The bull was monitored in the weeks after, but not destroyed. The death was recorded as accidental, with departure from the group formation and deliberate provocation of a bull and must listed as contributing factors. Vani came to Zimbabwe with a shot list and left in a body bag. Not far from home, a woman had just re-entered the water after her entire tour group was pulled out over a bull shark sighting. It was July 18th, 2015. The tour ran out of a small coastal outfitter on the Gulf side of Florida, running half-day snorkel trips to a shallow reef about 2 miles offshore. The water averaged between 8 and 14 feet deep, and the fish density at the site was high enough to regularly attract larger predatory species. Brenda Ford was 43 years old. She was a fitness instructor from Tampa, Florida, and had taken this specific tour twice before. She made sure everyone on the boat knew that before they left the dock. She had strong opinions about how coastal guides handled shark sightings, specifically that pulling a group out of the water was a liability decision rather than a safety one, and she shared those opinions with the group during the pre-departure briefing without being asked. It was the kind of thing you say when you want the people around you to know you are not like them. Bull sharks are one of the most dangerous coastal shark species in the world. They are common in shallow, warm water environments, including the same reef systems used for recreational snorkeling. Adult bull sharks average between 7 and 11 feet in length and between 200 and 500 pounds. They are aggressive, highly territorial in shallow water, and are responsible for a significant number of unprovoked attacks on humans globally. A bull shark making slow investigative passes through a group of swimmers is reason enough to end the session. Whether it attacks or not is beside the point. The guide's job is not to wait and find out. The group entered the water at around 10:15 a.m. 6 guests and the guide. Conditions were good, light current, visibility around 25 feet. The first 40 minutes were uneventful. At around 10:58 a.m., the guide spotted a bull shark moving along the outer edge of the reef at about 10 feet down, heading toward the group. The animal was roughly 8 feet long and kept circling back toward the swimmers. The guide signaled an immediate water exit. 5 of the 6 guests started moving toward the boat. Brenda surfaced, looked at the boat, looked back toward the shark, and told the group out loud that the guide was overreacting. Then she went back under. The guide surfaced and called to her. She came up briefly, said the shark was nowhere near her, and that she was not cutting her session short over nothing, and went back down. The guide instructed the boat operator to reposition toward her and tracked her from the surface. She had moved away from the reef into open water in the direction the shark had last been traveling. The guide could see her from the surface, hovering at mid-depth, facing outward. The shark came from below and to her left. A single fast strike to the upper left thigh, angled upward. It hit, released, and moved off. Brenda was knocked upward and broke the surface hard. The guide reached her within seconds of her surfacing. The wound was immediately serious. The bite had opened the left thigh deeply enough to reach the major vessels. Blood loss in open water was fast. The guide applied direct pressure with both hands and called the boat in. It reached them in about 90 seconds. Getting Brenda onto the deck took another minute. The boat operator pushed the throttle toward shore while the guide held pressure on the wound. The nearest shore access was about 12 minutes away at full speed. She lost consciousness around 4 minutes into the return. Emergency services were already waiting at the dock based on the radio call made during transit. Brenda Ford was pronounced dead at the dock. The femoral artery in her left thigh had been severed. That artery carries blood at high pressure, and once it is cut, the body loses blood faster than anyone on a moving boat can stop. By the time they reached the dock, the window for any kind of intervention had already closed. The boat's radio log documented the exit signal, the emergency call, and the return time. The 5 guests who had complied with the evacuation signal all gave consistent accounts of the briefing and the events on the water. The death was recorded as accidental. The circumstances that led to it were not. Being the most physically capable person on the boat apparently felt like enough of a qualification. Meanwhile, in Louisiana, a woman on a wetland tour had just declared alligators overhyped to a group of strangers and was about to find out how wrong she was. It was September 6th, 2016. The wetland preserve sat on the Gulf Coast of Louisiana, a privately run operation offering guided walking and kayak tours through a network of marsh channels and interconnected lagoons. The Eastern Lagoon was the largest body of water on the property and the most heavily populated with alligators. Phyllis Halcomb was 50 years old. She was a retired insurance adjuster from Baton Rouge who had spent her whole life near wetland environments and somewhere along the way had decided that counted as expertise. She grew up near bayous, had been around alligators her whole life, and made sure the group knew that during the pre-tour briefing. The problem with growing up around something dangerous and never getting hurt by it is that eventually you stop believing it can hurt you at all. American alligators are apex predators common throughout the southeastern United States. Adult males reach up to 15 feet in length and around 1,000 pounds. They are ambush predators. They sit still, stay concealed, and wait. At dusk, their ability to detect movement in low light makes them significantly harder to spot before it is too late. An attack starts with a fast surface lunge, a bite, and an immediate pull underwater. The death roll happens below the surface, and it is exactly what it sounds like. The group reached the Eastern Lagoon platform at around 6:10 p.m. The light was already going flat. The guide counted 4 alligators visible from the platform, 2 near the far bank, 1 on a mud flat to the east, and 1 that had been sitting near the platform side bank earlier, but was no longer visible. He pointed that last one out to the group. Not seeing it did not mean it had left. Phyllis had been quiet for most of the walk out. On the platform, she made up for it. She told the group alligators were slow and predictable. She said the restricted zone was excessive for anyone with basic common sense. She said she had walked bayou banks her entire life and never had a single problem, as though a lifetime without incident was proof of immunity rather than luck. The guide reminded the group they would be moving on in about 15 minutes and left her to it. At the 12-minute mark, he moved to the rear of the platform to answer questions from 2 other guests. He had his back to the lagoon for about 3 minutes. When he turned around, Phyllis was gone. She had gone down the side access steps and unlatched the gate at the bottom. She was crouching at the water's edge about 8 feet from the base of the steps, phone out, facing the lagoon. The light was low and orange by then. The water surface was dark. He called her name and moved toward the steps. The alligator had been in the water near the platform side bank the entire time. It came up fast, a surface lunge that cleared the waterline in a single motion. The bite closed on her right forearm as she instinctively raised it, and the animal's momentum drove her forward off the bank and into the water. She was under 2 seconds. The water settled almost immediately. He reached the bank within seconds, but there was nothing to see. A call went out to the preserve's main facility right away. The response team reached the Eastern Lagoon about 34 minutes later. They searched until dark and resumed at first light. Phyllis Halcom's body was recovered the following morning, 19 hours after the attack, in about 5 feet of water near the far bank under submerged vegetation. The post-mortem confirmed she drowned. The initial bite had fractured her right forearm and 3 ribs. The injuries to her arm and torso showed the animal had death rolled with her underwater before releasing. The access gate was found open. The death was recorded as accidental. Contributing factors listed were unauthorized descent from the observation platform and deliberate approach to the water within a restricted zone at dusk. Phyllis grew up around alligators and let that familiarity cost her everything. In Montana, a woman was about to storm off alone into grizzly country because her guide was walking too slowly. It was August 29th, 2013. The guided trek operated out of a small outfitter near the eastern edge of a wilderness area in northwestern Montana. The route covered about 9 miles of backcountry terrain over 2 days, with an overnight camp roughly halfway through. Harriet Good was 55 years old. She was a semi-retired attorney from Billings, Montana, and she led with that fact like it meant something out here. She had hiked recreationally her whole adult life and had never once had a bear encounter, which she treated as proof of competence rather than luck. During the briefing, she asked questions that were really just her own opinions, framed as curiosity. By the time the group set out, she had already decided the guide knew less about this trail than she did. Decades of hiking, without incident, had convinced her that her judgment was sound. The problem was she had never been tested. Grizzly bears are among the most dangerous large mammals in North America. Adult females average between 290 and 400 pounds, and adult males can reach up to 790 pounds. They can outrun any human on any terrain. A grizzly defending a food cache does not bluff. It attacks immediately, and it does not stop. The group set out at 7:30 a.m. The first 4 miles were uneventful. At around 10:45 a.m., the trail passed through a dense stand of lodgepole pine and alder with visibility down to about 15 feet on either side. About a quarter mile before this section, the guide picked up a strong carrion smell. He stopped the group. A large carcass in dense cover that close to the trail meant one thing. He told everyone to tighten up, get their bear spray out, and keep moving without stopping. Harriet said it was probably a deer that died naturally and that he was reading too much into it. He told her that was possible and that the protocol stood regardless. She complied, barely. About 200 yards in the trail curved sharply around a large rock outcrop. The guide came around first and stopped. A partially consumed elk carcass sat about 30 feet off the left side of the trail, freshly covered in pine duff and broken branches. He signaled the group to halt and started moving everyone backward. 4 of the 5 guests went immediately. Harriet had come around the curve and seen the carcass. She stopped but did not go back. The guide stepped in front of her and told her to move. She said she wanted to see if the bear was close. He told her again. She stepped around him. The grizzly had been in the brush between the carcass and the trail the whole time. She came out fast, with no warning. The guide discharged his bear spray at about 10 feet, caught her across the face, and deflected her into the rock outcrop. She recovered in under 2 seconds and reoriented. Harriet was about 6 feet behind him. The bear went straight for her. The first strike was the right forepaw, connecting with the left side of Harriet's head. The force of it put her into the brush off the side of the trail. The bear went in after her. The guide discharged a second burst toward the brush and moved in shouting. The bear paused and turned toward him. He discharged the rest of the canister into her face from close range, and she broke off, moving back in the direction of the carcass. He found Harriet in the brush about 15 seconds later, on the ground, and unresponsive. He activated his emergency beacon immediately. The nearest ground team was 3 hours out by trail, and the cloud ceiling grounded any air response until morning. He stayed with her. She died about 40 minutes after the attack. The forepaw strike had fractured her skull and caused severe bleeding in her brain. That was what killed her. Deep lacerations across the left side of her face and neck, and a separate wound to her abdomen from a follow-up strike were also noted. Surviving that kind of head injury without immediate surgery was not possible, and surgery was 3 hours away at minimum. Her bear spray was found still clipped to her pack, safety tab intact. She never touched it. The beacon log and physical evidence at the scene match the guide's account. The female grizzly was monitored after, but not destroyed. The death was recorded as accidental, with failure to retreat on direct instruction listed as the primary contributing factor.